Pat Craig from here in New Brunswick, and right now I'm working as a carpenter. Always had a little bit of a sort of artistic side. When I was a kid, I definitely leaned into the more creative rather than analytical things. Always loved art and music, and so doing photography and sort of trying to express myself through that just sort of came up as a logical next step. Writing's sort of something I picked up in university. I used to experiment with writing a little bit creatively anyway when I was locked up when I was younger, didn't have a whole lot else to do. Years and years later, wound up going to university, and it turned out that my writing was pretty good for a fellow that never really been taught how to do it. I had more than one professor say that I should start putting a little bit of effort into it and maybe publish here and there, so set up a website and published a few little personal essays and continued to have my academic writing talked about pretty nicely. Just a little creative outlet that I ran into by accident. It's definitely sort of a creative awakening, I guess. Throughout my 20s, I didn't really have a whole lot of time to create or do anything outside of, get up in the morning and do what I had to do. So having the freedom and the time that going to university gave me, and then the amount of positive feedback I got about my writing was the next level. It was constant, it was immediate. So evidently I'm really good at it. With writing now, the next step is to try to do something with it, combine writing and visual art into something that's got a bit of meaning to it. My girlfriend's been modeling for a long time, and one of the things she'd say to me occasionally when we first got together was, you should model, right? You should model. No real interest in that, right? But of course, being exposed to it over and over is like, got some time, let's try her out, right? So did some work with another friend of mine that I knew, put those up on Instagram, and within a couple of days I got a fella getting a hold of me saying, you want to do a shoot for Country Liberty. I'm like, fuck yeah, you know what I mean? That's a brand opportunity. So let's do that, right? I mean, that was an awesome time. It was super fun to be a part of a project for a brand that I've been wearing for a long time, right? And that felt good, decent exposure. Since then, handful of other shoots. I'm starting to work my own concepts into them. The idea with that is just to work with as many people as possible and, see what kind of ideas we can put out. Yeah, it just formed out of two things that, I enjoy doing and that other people like to see, right? People like to read my writing, they like to look at my pictures, so why not blend the two together and put some meaning into it? For context and background, I was diagnosed when I was 5 or 6 years old as being on the autism spectrum. My version of autism isn't necessarily that apparent. It's a communication limitation for me, right? I struggle with nonverbal communication. Body language I don't really pick up on. Social cues have always been a little bit difficult for me, so a lot of the skills that I had to get along in life were acquired under duress. Like I said, a little bit of prison time where that's an environment where you sort of have to be aware of people and body language and stuff, right? It's a survival thing, it's a safety thing. So this is the sort of thing that I've really started to focus a lot on and work a lot on now that I'm in my 30s and I'm starting to figure out a direct path. And one of the things that sort of stood out to me is that there's a lot of people, a huge community of people, you see them on Twitter and all over the internet. It's called neurodivergent people, right? That's the word they use now for people that are maybe something along the spectrum, ADHD, something like that, right? It sort of stood out to me that all the difficulties that were caused by this difference for me were definitely not unique. Very, very, very common. A lot of people struggling with the type of things that most people sort of come by naturally. And then I got thinking more about it, and I said, there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes along with these things, right? I mean, because not getting along so easy in life can lead you to all sorts of stuff. You develop anxiety, you get down on yourself, you get depressed, things can happen out of that, addictive behaviors, even, as far as criminal behaviors. And I look at a lot of the stuff that I did and thought and said growing up, and sort of all can be traced back to one thing, right? With visual art, I've really taken to modeling recently, right? I love getting my picture taken. I like, expressing myself visually and creatively through this medium. So I was working with a handful of photographers. One of them and I had already sort of planned to do a photo series on depression, dark, moody, illustrative idea of what it is to sort of be in your head, really not okay. A couple of weeks ago, and I said, why don't we just dive into the whole thing, right? So let's talk about neurodivergency. Let's talk about what it's like to be autistic, what it's like to have ADHD, all of these things. Tons of people in my generation, we didn't really get the awareness and the intervention that kids nowadays are getting, right? This was the early 90s, and it was sort of not, I guess, as well understood or talked about as it is now. So the result of that was a lot of us coming up into our 30s and 40s, not really any further ahead developmentally than we were back then. So the photo series, I'm going to work with a few different photographers, and each one's going to take a different angle of the project. And each series of photos, each set from individual photographers, is going to be accompanied by my writing. The photos, I mean, they're the catchy part, they're the grab, but really they're the illustrations for the book, essentially. What I've done is I've done a whole lot of writing about my personal experiences from sort of a more of an aware of it perspective, right? I'm pairing that with a lot of, you know, clinical research and fact to back it up, sort of how my experiences translate to go along with stuff that lots of other people are dealing with too. And the idea is to get this writing out there, but accompanied by the photos. You know, talking about this type of thing, particularly from a man's perspective, right? We're getting into the mental health area of things and the asking for help area of things, and that's a hot topic now, and it's starting to really come up as something that needs to be said more of, because a lot of fellas out there struggling that don't want to say anything about it. It's not unique to men, but we're definitely kind of behind the curve as far as addressing the issue goes. It's one of those things that I just sort of want to dive into and see where it goes, right? Because I'd like to get other people involved, talk about their experiences. You know, if you're neurodivergent, you're struggling with mental illness, addiction, maybe you've done some time, anything that makes you different is the type of thing that I want people to come out and talk to me about, right? Share their experiences and sort of get in on the project. Having an unaddressed difference or illness can really wreck your life, right? You're just not going to have the type of life that, you know, every person kind of entitled to, right? Be able to get up in the morning, do your thing, come home at night seamlessly, right? You know, and not having your day-to-day life interrupted by panic attacks or massive depressive episodes, or just an inability to communicate with people on a functional level, right? Any and all things that stem from, you know, human psychology that can be troubling for people.